Good day, everybody. I hope you're all well. My name is Aaron Dahirian. I'm going to be the panel host for this event. Want to just quickly introduce myself, just for a couple of seconds, and then introduce the esteemed speakers. A lot of you probably know me. I run a consultancy business called RDC, Red Dawn Consulting, and we specialize in all things TMT, IoT being a very big topic, from strategy to implementation. I'd like to start by, first of all, thanking MEF for the fantastic organisation, Nasir in particular. And what I'd like to do is just introduce the esteemed panelists. We're very lucky to have them. So perhaps they could spend a few seconds explaining themselves and their role in the industry. Perhaps we start with Jimmy.
Hi, Aaron, and hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy Jones. I'm the head of security at Zariat, and Zariat is a cellular connectivity provider for specialising in IoT that also looks at security and innovation as part of our overall go-to-market. So we're trying to give that security and innovation balance to the IoT community to allow them to develop and move this industry forward as quickly as possible.
Good to see you again, Jimmy. And Sridhar?
Hello, good day to all of you. My name is Sri Ramachandran. I'm CTO of Somos. Somos is an identity management player, and as part of our overall identity management of connected devices, what we do is also do telephone number administration, as well as use the information to improve security and to reduce fraud in all of communications. And I'm glad to be here to be on this panel.
Thank you. Welcome. Andrew?
Hello, Aaron. Thank you. I'm Andrew Kola. I work as an EMEA sales manager for Wavely. Wavely is a global mobile IoT connectivity provider with headquarters in Copenhagen, Denmark, and Irvine, California, USA. We specialize in Internet of Things, IoT solutions, offering software-defined mobile network solutions and managed services.
Thank you. Noah?
Hi, my name is Noah Rafelko. I'm the CEO and founder of TSG Global. At TSG Global, we've really pioneered the supply chain management using blockchain technologies for anything from identity associated to telecommunications services, all the way to IoT devices and anything literally with a unique identifier that you need to track from one point to another and maintain identity. Thank you for having me around.
Okay, great. So let's just kick off a little bit. So as you can see, we've got some incredible expertise on this call. So please do have your questions ready. I think it's fair to say that IoT security and privacy is a significant issue, which is going to exponentially become more of an issue, and B, hasn't really been solved in a way that I think needs to be. So hopefully by the end of this, we'll have some ideas for how we could improve and some learnings. So I want to just kind of ask a few sort of simple questions, really, and ask the panelists to give us their views. So I wanted to start really with people that know me. I'm quite a commercial guy. I like to think of real life examples. So to my mind, the real split between IoT security and privacy is different between consumer and enterprise. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask if there are any real life examples of where IoT and privacy is a particular issue. And perhaps we can start with Jimmy, because you've got quite a rounded perspective, I think.
I like the question, actually. The easy answer is every IoT solution has a security and privacy issue. And it's interesting that you've highlighted the potential differences between the consumer and the enterprise, because I think if we take the individual first, it's imperative that we make sure that we understand, our families understand exactly what IoT is, because IoT, especially coupled with AI, is going to be the most pervasive technology we've seen to this point. And I think all we have to do is look at the influence of social media over the last 15, 20 years. That's a passive technology. It's had a huge impact on the way we lived our lives, mental health issues, things like that. Now, if we look at IoT, we're essentially taking a lot of those problems, and we're going to absorb them into a position where they can actively observe with us, and in later, actually already, interact with our physical lives. So I think everything we're seeing at the moment with social media is just going to be exaggerated when we start to look at IoT. And so it's hugely important for the individuals. And because of that, it's hugely important for the enterprise, because privacy and security is something that's going to become a buying decision. I think selling IoT solution with a poor security will be like selling a car without seatbelts. And we can see that in as a buying decision already. The US Cyber Trust Mark scheme was announced, I think, last month. That's a voluntary scheme, but it's a voluntary scheme supported by the FCC, NIST, the Biden administration. It's all about labeling to allow consumers to make an educated decision. And that's very interesting. That's voluntary, but in the UK and the EU, we're going one step further, that we're making security and privacy legally binding in 2024, which, in my opinion, really makes sense, because as a Brit, I can tell you that, going back to my seatbelt analogy, they made seatbelts mandatory in the UK to fit to every vehicle in 1967. But I grew up in the 70s. I can tell you I never had a seatbelt on. And it wasn't until they legislated and fined you for it in 1983 that my parents made me buckle up. I might say something about me and my parents rather than the government, but something anyway. Yeah. So that PSTI, the Product Security and Telecoms Infrastructure Bill, that's not very far away. That's April 2024, when they can start fining you for not having strong passwords and other elements. The EU have done the same. Article 3 of the Radio Equipment Directive is due on in 1st of August 2024. So we're only talking a little way ahead. Luckily, they're all based on certain standards that underpin things globally. ETSI 303645. Anybody who wants to look, there's some really good information on people like Copperhorse, Cetone, the IoT Security Foundation, obviously MEF, have lots of advice. Copperhorse and Cetone also have training. So I think it's really, really important. It's something even at Zariat we've looked at. We created a free online resource for the ETSI standard. Obviously, it doesn't replace reading the standard itself, but hopefully it reinterprets the language to make it easier to use. So I think really it's important for both enterprise and consumer.
Yeah, Jimmy, I'd like to thank you very much for that very comprehensive answer. I just wanted to throw that open to the others. Anyone else got any specific examples that they may have witnessed? I want to share specific examples.
Yeah, I think when you look at the enterprise and consumer, one of the big points of convergence was in remote cameras, right? So cameras or connected cameras were deployed widely in the enterprise for surveillance and security purposes and all that. And with the online shopping boom, what that meant was consumers started adopting cameras like Ring doorbells and so on, right? Which enabled the essentially the connected cameras to be the largest deployed IoT use case. So there's probably over 1 billion of them, right, globally. So it's an extensive use case. And what happens is that when you compromise any of these things, it's not just security. You're actually compromising privacy at that point, especially with consumers. So this is one of those things where the whole connected camera is definitely a use case. And then when you look at the other kind of case studies that have come out, one of the most common smart plug, which is the Wemo version 2, had a security defect in it that could be exploited. So this is it's kind of I think if you look at the hackers, they're just going after the ones that are deployed the most. So clearly connected cameras and the smart plugs and so on get deployed the most, and they just go after those things.
Thank you. Anybody else got any specific sort of real life examples to bring this discussion to life?
I'd like to add the Land Rover eSIM hack that was pretty important to understand, where this is that same intersection that Suri and Jimmy talked about, which is basically there's this intersection between the enterprise and the consumer, that the enterprise has to take a stronger stance and a more protective role of the consumer. So, for example, the eSIM was hacked in the vehicle, and if you're not aware of it, most cars, if not all now, have some level of connectivity to them. In other words, you're driving an IoT device, and there's so many different sensors and there's so many different things that run off the computer systems that if you look at that intersection, or if you look at smart meters in your home, here you have a utility that you have to have. You have electricity in your home, and there's an eSIM in it or an iSIM in it. And when you think about this global world of connectivity, whether you want to be involved in IoT or not, that intersection exists. And to Suri's point, hackers and nefarious folks are going to attack that vector first, because it's the most widely spread IoT devices out there.
Okay. Andrew, do you have anything to say, or shall we move on to the next question?
No, it just got me thinking that there is an example of this healthcare shields in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was in U.S., California, where data was breached by hackers, and it affected around over 2 million people. That was an extensive breach, I would say, to mention that example.
Okay. And when you think about all of those, Aaron, I think the important thing is you can't turn IoT off. So all of those, that is in our environment. When it's going back to social media, it's your phone. You can turn your phone off. Nobody does, but you can. You can't turn your smart car off. You can't turn your smart house off, and you can't turn your smart street off. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah. So I'd like to share a very specific example that happened to me actually only yesterday, which is a bit of a sob story. But I got very compromised at the bank, and have lost quite a lot of money in the process, with the police were involved and everything. And it was quite serious. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because it got me thinking. That's interesting, because should I raise this on this panel? And it got me thinking that we have to think about this the security cameras, the data within the banks, etc. And somewhere in that process, something's broken down. But the problem is that nobody takes responsibility for the whole piece. Everybody's got a bit of the jigsaw to solve. So I think my sort of takeaway from all of this is that a big project that we just completed in the Middle East, in Qatar, on the whole end-to-end digital economy strategy, was that actually it's so disparate and there's so many different players that when there is a breach or an attack, I think we all need to harmonize. And the other question is, who owns the data? Because we're not allowed to get the data. So I just wanted to kind of make the point that a real life example is telling me that actually end-to-end is a key requirement that we need to think about. And we'll come on to that in one of the questions we have later on. So I'd like to ask a question which is similar in the same sort of vein as the case that I just mentioned there, which is, how do IoT security and privacy issues arise in the first place? Okay, so we call these vectors of attack in some cases, in cybersecurity world, I guess. So I thought, Sridhar, you might be a good person to kick that answer off for that one.
Sure, yeah. The IoT in general ecosystem allows for a lot of different areas to go in and attack, and provides what they call a large surface area of attack. So stepping back, you kind of look at a deployment of an IoT device, of IoT devices. in terms of devices that are probably remote, that are connected using some kind of wireless or wired technology. So there's a network in between. And ultimately, we want to get the data that those devices send to be put to use in a business critical decision or something useful, right? So when you look at this big deployment, so devices are definitely things that can be attacked. There is a network itself. You can create what are called man-in-the-middle attacks on the network. And then there's the data itself that can be compromised, altered, compromised, stolen, and so on, so that, so you can have theft in any of these three areas. When you look at the specific vectors for each of these, so if you take a device, the original and the most easy way to compromise devices was, unfortunately, people would ship out devices with default passwords in them.
Yeah.
Possible before. And there are also more sophisticated ones. So if it's a and take over those devices. And the other way, which is very common, was going after known vulnerabilities in the networking stack, so that you can exploit ports that were open on those devices and so on, so you can actually get into the device and either inject malware, create DDoS attacks, and so on, so that allowed for things to actually attack the actual IoT devices. Now the thing is, things are getting more sophisticated now, because most IoT devices today, there is a whole supply chain that actually puts together an IoT device. So either even for a device manufacturer, or even for IoT device designer, there are components in hardware and software that need to come together to actually create this ultimate IoT device. And the new age hacker actually tries to exploit all the different vulnerabilities along that supply chain. So it's not just the IoT device. You can actually compromise one of the elements of the software that goes into that device, and that creates a backdoor for eventual exploits later on. And so as we plug more holes into those in the overall security chain, the hackers are getting more sophisticated, and they're adding more new backdoors and holes into this, so they can actually exploit in a much more complex way. And so visibility of these is the biggest thing that we're actually tracking right now, which is, how do we even know where the issues are? And what that means is we got to kind of open up the bill of materials, open up what is the supply chain that actually produced that IoT device. Where do we know where these components came from? Are those legitimate? Or do we know that there are well-known exploits or vulnerabilities in those components? So should we plug them? So that's the state of the art today, which is understanding where the actual visibility of this. And when you look at the recent legislation and standards around this, all have been aimed at trying to figure out how to create this layer of visibility, so that we can much better know what the exploits are and how to fix those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So I think that what's coming out of this is that there are kind of three levels of attack, really. There's more than three, but if we just break it down, then you've got the device level, then you've got the network level, and then the actual data itself. And this is what I was referring to about the end-to-end. So I think it's very important for us to understand how we can manage the security. We're going to talk about solutions in a little bit, but does anyone else have any sort of specific example, kind of ideas around how do these issues and what sort of attacks are we talking about?
I think you're absolutely right. There's the device, the network, and the application. So if you think about it, that's the DNA of every IoT solution. If you don't understand the full DNA of your solution, then you've got a problem. You can't protect it. And I think the other thing that Sri touched on, which is really important, is the importance of a software bill of materials and a hardware bill of materials to understand exactly what's in your device. We see a lot of the time that, particularly the device end up being off-the-shelf components that are brought together. And that can compromise your design a little bit. I mean, it helps your speed to market, but it compromises your design a little bit because you're essentially creating Frankenstein's IoT device. So you need to understand exactly what's in there. And I think we push all of our partners and all of our customers to consider SBOM or HBOM tools to be able to find out exactly what's there. Because if you don't know what's there, you can't monitor for new attacks. You can't see where you are. So completely agree with both of you.
Okay, brilliant. I think it might be, I'm sure that we can continue answering that question in this next one, which is around solutions. Now I want to get into, now we've identified the sorts of problems, some examples. I'd like to move on to how do we solve this, right? What do we do? We're the experts, we should be able to come up with some solutions. So my question is, what solutions are there to address these risks from a more of a kind of, let's say, practical and technical perspective? Andrew, I think given your sort of position as a full cycle IoT business, you might be able to answer that one.
Well, we know that IoT systems are interconnected devices, sensors, and networks and applications that collect and process IoT data. So they expose new vulnerabilities and risks, even that they enable new capabilities and efficiencies. To secure us from the exposure, I believe we need to define security and privacy objectives. We can address the requirements in regard to regulatory obligations, stakeholder expectations. We can normally look into the balance between functionality and performance and question what is our priority here. Therefore, we can use the objectives as the guide to design, implementation, and operation of our IoT systems. One good practice is to implement a layered security and privacy architecture, covering all of the IoT components such as security and privacy, control of the device, network, platform, and application levels, using secure protocols, encryption, authentication, authorization, and access to protect data in transit and at rest. For example, when we process data for procedures to ensure data quality, privacy, security, and compliance, at Wavely, we work with AI, which can help in detecting abnormal activity. We analyze patterns, and if there is any change, then we can raise an alert. Another practice we use against cyber threats is locking the SIM cards to one device only. Data security needs certainly implementation of robust security measures to protect IoT data from unauthorized access and breaches. We can as well apply other practices such as continuous monitoring of the IoT system for any anomalies and events that indicate potential security breaches and privacy incidents.
Okay, so we're going to come on to kind of regulatory considerations because I think that's very important just in a few moments. I wanted to open up that question to the wider panel in terms of solutions. So what other solutions do you have, perhaps in your own business, or that you think generally should there be, we should think about to solve this problem?
So I'd like to add that you have to look at new technologies because you can't just look at legacy technologies to solve more modern issues. So as we expand these networks and have these chains of custody, I think we really just talked about this overarching trilogy or trinity, holy trinity, which is really, if you think about it, you're talking about the identity, you're talking about supply chain, and you're talking about privacy. And how do you maintain that? And in this new world that's coming, it really is about zero trust. In other words, don't trust anything. Everything has to be validated, because if you don't trust anything, then every layer, like Endred said, is a security layer that you can enforce. And to your point, Arun, when you talk about end-to-end tracking, it's not just end-to-end within the channel of tracking. You also have to have this secondary channel that lives outside of that network, so that it's not compromised within the network. As Sri said, the man in the middle attack. So if you look at something like Huawei, with all the cell towers that were in the telecom gear in the United States that's being pulled, it's because they were the man in the middle. That technology was the man in the middle. And when you think about end to end, you not only have to cover the supply chain, but you also have to cover the chain of custody, how things are handed off between each party. Because as the IoT world expands all around us and becomes tens, if not hundreds of billions over the years, you're going to just be completely inundated by data that you don't even know exists around you, but it's being captured and shared. So if we can make this invisible under a zero trust environment, and that's why I fell in love with blockchain years ago, not because of cryptocurrency, but a new way to track in a cryptographic way and have an immutable chain of custody in a supply chain. So that enforces the governmental rules, as Jimmy said, that you can now have both light touch, like in the United States, where NIST is stating in their standards as well, that you need a unique identity for every single IoT device. Well, again, it comes into identity. Whether it's a person or a thing, it has to have a unique identity so that we can track it. So that's all I wanted to add.
So I just wanted to pick up on two words there. So identity, absolutely. We need to know what we're dealing with and who owns them, those aspects. And then the second one is responsibility. So I think the problem that we've kind of witnessed in some of the attacks and how those issues have been resolved is that it's whose responsibility is it to deal with it. And because we've got this disparate supply chain we've discussed already, where we talked about high-level device networks and applications, but there's a lot more to it than that. We've got SIM cards, we've got different bearer technologies, we've got different networks. So it's not just one network, not just one type of device. Are there any solutions out there that you can think of that would help us to put in place a governance structure around who's responsible for all these things? Are there any? Can blockchain help us with that in terms of identifying where the problem lay and whose responsibility it is? Do you think?
Well, you can. I mean, you have to understand that all blockchains are built with different elements that control things. You have an administrator that oversees the administrative tasks. You have an operator that does the back and forth little transactions. You have the validators that are all out there validating things, whether it is a stakeholder or whatever. And then you also have governance. And governance is very important for any environment to succeed. So you do need a level of governance that's separate and autonomous from it. So basically that they can help, whether it's inside the industry, inside the government, whether it's the MEF or whether it's others, you need these levels of policing and governance to help guide this. And therefore, the rules can be set not only by the governance, they're the ones who are going to really enforce it, but really each stakeholder. You have to have each stakeholder held accountable. And I have this quick story that a good friend of mine asked me at one point. I mean, it was actually about, people getting money taken with cryptocurrency, like fraud. And they said, well, it's the end user that was hacked, but it was hacked maybe by something that was in that supply chain. So they said, well, do we, hold the cryptocurrency company, liable? Do we hold the telephone company who said, hey, wait a second, you can use 2FA, you can use texting, which is not the most secure thing out there, for security to get into this account. Do we hold the application company that provided that level of 2FA security and gave it the stamp of approval? My answer was very quick and to the point, all of the above, because every stakeholder has a very specific role to play in making sure that by the time it reaches an end user, that we've all done our part. So really it comes into the entire chain of custody. And again, each chain of custody in blockchain, you can actually think about how they track art, diamonds, the origination of food. You'll see it on TV and all that kind of stuff. But you really need to track in a much more granular atomic way, because food can be altered along the way unless there's something in the DNA that or the food itself that can be tracked. But IoT devices are a little different. They actually do have a unique identifier in them. So you can actually track all the way from its manufacturer or the equipment side to the use of it. Who is connecting this device and where are they connecting it to? And what are they sharing between the two? And is that end user aware of that privacy acknowledgement or sharing of that data? In other words, another element of blockchain is actually permissioning certain elements of that data or information to be shared, and for what reason. So everything can be tracked, and because it's immutable, you always have somewhere to go back and search, whether it's a governmental entity or some other entity that enforces it, the governance of the chain itself. So that would be my add to it, Aaron.
I just want to double click on the identity part. So one of the things that we tend to see is that a typical IoT device has so many identities already built into it. For instance, and it's used differently by different stakeholders, right? So there is the manufacturer who puts in a physical serial number or something like that on the device. And then there is the connectivity part, which is mandatory for every IoT device. And that's if it's cellular, there is an IMEI. If it's an Ethernet based device, it's got a MAC ID. If it's a Bluetooth connected device, it's got a Bluetooth ID, right? It's similarly for LoRaWAN and all that. So this is the connectivity ID. The next thing is kind of the service layer, right? So in the case of cellular, without an IMSI, there is no service. There is no data that ever goes out that actually allows this device to connect to the network. So that's another. So with all the connectivity players only look at the IMSI. They don't care about anything underneath that, right? And then you look at the enterprise itself or the end user who looks at it as, okay, I don't know about all those other devices. I mean, all those other identities. All I care about is, okay, this is my living room Nest thermostat. This is the device that controls my turbine, right? That kind of stuff. And so you have all of these identities, and each of them potentially has its own life cycle, because you can have warranty issues and swap out the device and the physical identities change, but you may still call it your living room thermostat, or it may still be the same thing that controls your turbine. So all these identities have its own life cycle. And so we need a way to manage this across the entire life cycle of the device for the end user. And that's where the whole identity management and zero trust is really important part of that. Just as Noah mentioned, zero trust is important part of this to actually enable this identity management with zero trust to really create the end-to-end security around that you've been talking about.
I think that's an excellent point, because what you both said there is collaboration, because it's an ecosystem. It's so diverse that you have to be able to work together. And I think, particularly as telecoms companies, we've been very insular. I think we need to open up about that. I'm very interested as well in what Sri and Noah said about attestation, essentially, identity. Because as a company, Zariat were approached by a company called Smart Axiom, blockchain company. And they said exactly that. They wanted to be able to attest that the device that they put the SIM in was theirs. And then they wanted to later be able to attest that it could access a particular ledger they sell to different companies. We opened, as a company, we're very lucky. We own our own SIM profiles and we can design them. But we opened up our network, we opened up our SIM profile, and we allowed Smart Axiom to write tokens at the point of manufacture. So they manufacture it, they put it in, we put the token, well, they put the token in via our network. And then at the point of go live, when they've sold it to a customer, again, we allow them access to put a token in. So it's actually the solution provider that's doing doing the identity and the attestation. In that way, we remove the multiple identities that Sri mentioned as a problem. We remove that because we actually put it in the hands of the final guys, the consumer's throat to choke. So that's where we're looking to do. We've done that in other ways as well, but particularly on blockchain, that's been very successful for us.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I would like to emphasize something that in relation to the regulation industry bodies and their role, I believe that their role of regulation in industry bodies provide a framework where they ensure IoT security is regulated and it enables more robust and resilient frameworks for IoT devices and networks of which they are part of. For example, just as the European Commission's role in this case with their recent announcement of the Cyber Resilience Act is aiming to increase the security of, for example, European IoT software and hardware by setting minimum standard requirements for connected devices throughout their product life cycle. So I think this will enforce more responsibility across the IoT ecosystem.
Yeah, so Andrew, you just basically created a lovely segue into my very last question. And if anybody has any questions from the audience, please ask so we can, I don't think there are any yet, but if there are, please be encouraged to speak up. So let's drill down on the regulation. So I want to expand that question a little bit, seeing as you've already given us an answer, is what are the role of regulation and industry bodies in fixing the problem? Of course, we're hosted by MEF, so they're obviously doing their part very well, but we need to understand end to end what regulation and industry bodies should do. Does anybody have any thoughts or words of wisdom to help us understand how they can help?
I think there's a lot of good information out there by a lot of good bodies, MEF being one of them. The IoT Security Foundation, that it has got a fantastic library, to be honest. I'd advise anyone to go and have a look at that for advice. But there are industries that can, like the medical industry, the auto industry, that are particularly focused on security because of the impact any risk could have. But I think in the end, you do have to legislate. Like I said before, seatbelts were there since 1967. They only started wearing them in 83. That's because there was a stick. I think in the end, you do need the carrot and the stick. And I think we're in a nice position at the moment that's where we are. We've got the stick coming in 12 months in the EU and the UK. I'm pretty sure that'll happen as well in the US later on. And having that ability to also show that you are a secure solution, like the US cybersecurity mark, I think there you have your carrot. So I think we are actually moving in that direction. And I think if you surf the internet, there'll be lots of advice, but particularly the IoT Security Foundation and MEF, excellent resources.
Okay, so just on that, as I mentioned to you earlier, we did a significant project in the Middle East for a big regulator, and it was a humongous project to scan the globe, to look at best practices and figure out what is the best way for first of all, what digital economy infrastructure do we need for the future, but also how do we regulate and make sure that it's safe. And the conclusion that we reached from that entire massive project was that actually, a suggestion is that actually it's the data. So if you manage the ownership, control, compliance, consequences, tracking, monitoring of data, then that's the heart of the problem. Obviously, it's not all of it, but it's a big part. So that was my kind of input to this discussion. But does anyone have any sort of? I mean, I know, Jimmy, you're quite hot on the topic of regulation, but in terms of industry bodies or anything that you might be doing in your businesses to sort of promote this problem, is there anything that you can share with us that you're involved in or that you witnessed in your journeys, where you go for learnings?
You're entirely right. It's for IoT to be successful, it needs a global platform of standardization. And to be honest, we're seeing that. ETSI 303645 underpins the PSTI I spoke about earlier in the UK and the EU and the US. But if you look at that particular ETSI standard, it covers everything from telemetry to security to passwords to GDPR. It's all in there, and it's an excellent standard to work to. And I think that is being globally accepted in most regions. Obviously, there's some outliers, but in 90% of the regions, I believe if you build your solution to be to that standard, then you'll be globally accepted. There is some really good tools. There's one at Copper Horse. I don't work for them, by the way. They just happen to have good resources. They map every regulation around the globe to that particular ETSI 303645 standard. So you can see what your region needs or what your industry vertical needs by just looking at your particular standard, and it will refer you to the appropriate sections of that particular document, which isn't huge. And as I said, we have a easy to read one on our website. If you wanted to use that, that would be good.
In the last minute, we've got a question. I think this might be very relevant to the point that Jimmy just made. So it says here that, and this is from David Douglas, says that standardization is required, but that challenge can also make it easier for bad parties to breach the ecosystem on a larger scale. Is that something that you agree with or have an answer for?
I think the way the standards are being written, they've been quite clever. So they're not prescriptive. They allow you to, they give you a problem you have to solve. They don't say you have to do it X, Y, and Z, but they give you suggestions, and then you can go to somewhere else to work out how you do it. So while I would say that potentially is yes, I think the standards have been written in such a way that they're open enough to interpretation that you can affect them in your solution in the way that's appropriate for your solution, because everybody's got a different risk aversion. If I'm selling nuclear weapons, I've got a worse risk aversion than I'm selling ice cream. I probably shouldn't be selling nuclear weapons, but you see what I'm saying? It's a difference of it's a different risk aversion. But yeah, they're quite open, so they can be interpreted to be appropriate to your solution.
Okay. I think we have to wrap up now. We've come to the 2 o'clock mark, or for me anyway, in the UK. But I just wanted to kind of thank you all. I think this summary points, that we recognise that we need to think end to end. Data is the beating heart of IoT, and we have to get that right. I think we started off by talking about examples, and Jimmy had mentioned that the issue is across all industries and use cases. I would slightly challenge that to say that actually in some critical communications or enterprise environments, there's a different outcome risk, which is financial and perhaps can be also economically risky. On the personal side of it, there's also an issue. So, for example, in IoT, in entertainment, might not be as risky. But if we then consider the point that was made about the different, I think it was 3 different identities, is it less important that an individual is getting attacked and compromised than a business? I think not. But I think that if we take the approach and be relaxed about it, for when we think there's no economic outcome issue, then I think that could be a danger. So I think the message is really we've got to consider, going back to Jimmy's point, that actually the whole of IoT does have risks, but different risks that have different outcomes, be it personal or financial.
I think just to add to that, I think that's a risky strategy, because there's a very famous hack where the casino gets hacked through his fish tank. Now, casinos, they check everything. They left the fish tank empty. They left the fish tank open, and they got hacked from that. So I'm a security guy. I don't think it matters if it's your TV, your refrigerator, your car, or your smart light. Everything's everything's an opportunity. If you close every opportunity, then I think that's the best policy.
Yeah, I think we're agreeing. I totally agree that at the end we have to look at all. To your point, very good point. We're ending where we started. With Jim, you said thank you for that, which is that actually you've just taught us that if you keep your eye off the ball on things like fish tanks, you will get attacked where you wouldn't have expected to, which happened to me yesterday. So there you go. All right. Well, thank you all for all your time, and I think we've gone a little bit over. I'll leave it over to the organisers. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.